All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Big Idea Podcast. My name is Eric Bramlett, and I am joined today by Tammy Melchien. Tammy, welcome.
Hello.
Welcome to the Big Idea Podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Tammy is doing so much great work in the teaching team area, in particular the writing team and building that group. And she had a lot to do with this Big Idea map that we are discussing today, so I wanted to bring her here to share with you just a little bit of what we'll be talking about for this series. This is our opening day series. This is the good stuff for Show Up Sunday. Yeah, so we are excited about it, and it's kicking off the fall in many ways. It's launching the new space at the Yellow Box. Lots of campuses are taking advantage of this opportunity for September 14th. We want a huge, effort made towards getting butts in the seats on that weekend, and we're excited to see what God will do as a result of that. But we also will be talking about something that day, and the weeks that follow. And so, so the series is called Love Can, and Love Can do a lot of things, and I guess each week we kind of finish a sentence, so to speak, of all the things that love can do. So Tammy, why don't you talk to us just a little bit about what you see as maybe the goals of the series, what you see the series is hoping to accomplish, and then we'll dive in week to week.
Sure. Well, I think this is a series that hopefully will hit on some real felt needs for people. That'll be things that are real relevant to their life, their relationships, difficult circumstances that they're going through, a desire to have a sense of purpose in their life. And so we're hoping that this series hits on a variety of things that will connect with people where they're at. And Love Can, really the basis behind that is not just some general sense of love, but that God's love can. That God is love, and it's because of His love that our relationships can be rescued, that we can overcome our circumstances, that we can have purpose in life. And so throughout this series, we're going to be looking at some of the most famous passages in the Bible on love and what they tell us about what God's love can do in our lives and through our lives.
Wow, that sounds awesome. So lots of wedding clips then, right? Everybody find your clips from your wedding when you got to recite some of these verses, because I have a feeling it's going to show up. All right, well, we are starting with week 1, and this week is opening day, and we are talking about how love can rescue our relationships. So Tammy, tell us where we're headed that day. What's the verse? What's the overall direction? Sure.
Well, obviously, when we say famous verses on love in the Bible, a lot of people are going to think about a passage that's often read at weddings, 1 Corinthians 13. And so we're going to look at just a couple of verses from that passage, verses 4 and 5, the one that I'm sure is familiar to you when I start saying, love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. And looking at how that description of love really is, how that directly relates to the way that we treat the most important people in our lives, and how if we try to let God empower us to live out those things, to live out kindness, to live out not boasting, to live out patience, how that really could transform our relationships, rescue our relationships, if you will. And so we're going to stick pretty closely to that passage, but we'll have other supporting material from some of Paul's books that reinforces those concepts that we find there in 1 Corinthians 13.
Now, I mean, a lot of times when we start talking about relationships and we start talking about love, how much of this, like, as you're just scanning, like, what you think, where you think the teaching is headed, I mean, we are talking about trying to make this applicable to lots of our relationships, and so it's kind of the broad brush of, this could be your family, this could be, siblings, this could be your spouse, this could be your children.
Yep.
Talk a little bit about the challenge that shows up there. Like, what do you find, when you're trying to sort of address, because a lot of times we talk about, well, be specific, because being specific is kind of how you tell that story, and yet we're also trying to make sure we're communicating that this applies to all of our relationships.
Yeah, and I feel like this one is going to, the categories we're looking at, we're not talking about marriage, we're not talking about parenting in here, we're talking about things like kindness. We're talking about character qualities of, even acts of the will.
Sure.
And being, choosing to be patient, choosing to be kind, those type of things. So I think the fact that we're coming at it more as these are like qualities that God can empower you to live out, that His love can help you do things that maybe on your own strength you can't do. I think the nature that we're looking at those qualities from this verse is going to make it applicable, to anyone. So when we get to it, we might even be talking about, because we talk about rescue relationships, we may challenge people to think about what relationship in their life right now is on life support,
Sure.
or is in danger of being destroyed. So whoever that might be, that could be a family relationship, that could also be a relationship with a coworker or a neighbor or a friend. So I think by the nature of what we're going to talk about here, I think it'll be applicable to just about any situation.
No, that's good. That's good. All right. Well, that's basically where we're headed with week 1. And when you think about, an opening day environment or, anticipating large crowds, I mean, we're definitely looking for that felt need that's out there where people, I think we underestimate how desperate people are walking into our environments when it comes to their relationships. That, for, like you said, the ones that feel like they're on life support, in many cases, they literally have no idea where to turn. They have no idea what to do. And we've got an hour, So, hopefully you feel the weight of that and feel that, this is, and it's not a burden, but it's a huge opportunity. So hopefully that inspires you to think in terms of, how can we tell stories that will connect with somebody who's walking in the door skeptical, walking in the door desperate, and ready for a change.
Yes.
All right, well, let's talk about session 2. And just when you thought things were bleak because you needed your relationships rescued.
Your circumstances suck.
Then your circumstances suck. What are you talking about next week? I don't know. That sounds bad. Love can overcome my circumstances. So talk a little bit about this because we're still in 1 Corinthians 13 a little bit, but then we jump into some narrative. So tell us what we're talking about with that, Tim.
Yeah, I think in this big idea, knowing that people are coming in with all kinds of situations, all kinds of struggles, things that probably some of us can relate to, and other things that maybe we can't. But the bottom line, I think, that we would love people to walk away from this week is a sense of hope, and a hope because God's love can strengthen, sustain us, help us overcome, help us walk through whatever we're going through. So we're going to continue with 1 Corinthians 13 and the parts in the scripture in there, verse 7, that talks about being able to, that love protects, it trusts, it hopes, it perseveres. And again, how God can empower us to, in whatever circumstances we're facing, to trust, to persevere, to hope. But we're also going to be looking at a passage from the book of Mark where the disciples find themselves in a terrifying experience out on a lake in the middle of a storm. And of course, there's an obvious metaphor there for the storms that are going on in our lives, the stormy circumstances we might be facing, and how they begin to panic because it seems like they're in danger, and in their greatest time of need, Jesus is asleep in the boat. And I think sometimes that's the way we feel when we're in the hardest stuff in our life, is we wonder where he is, and we wonder why he's not doing anything about it. But obviously in that story, when Jesus, when they wake him up, he calms the storm right away, but he says, why were you still afraid? Do you have no faith? And so hopefully...
And I love that after he says that, they're terrified.
Of him.
Yeah, it's like, well, which is it? You
Yeah.
know, it's like if I'm asleep, you're mad, and if I'm awake, you're frightened. So
Yeah.
figure it out,
Yeah. So hopefully this week will be both a challenge to us of, a little bit of the "O ye of little faith," but also a great encouragement, a reminder that even when it seems like God is sleeping, he's not, and that his love is present, and it can carry us through.
Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, I mean, again, to just sort of hit the touchdown of where people are at, I think that's another thing that I think we underestimate is how valuable it is to recognize that there are storms, because I think a lot of people have maybe a church experience where the goal was to sort of sugarcoat and to sort of pretend that nothing's wrong and that nothing's going on. And I think anytime we have an opportunity, wherever we are, if we're the ones on the stage, if we're the ones, teaching, but to let people know, no, we're real people. We have real problems. Yeah. And God is still with us even in the midst of things that aren't going great.
Yeah, I think it's important in these first 2 weeks that we try to do as much as we can to tell authentic stories. I just had coffee with someone who talked about how her growing up church experience was no one was ever really real. That we actually grew up in somewhat similar stance, and we were laughing about the unspoken prayer request. How that's no one would ever really say what was going on. It was just the unspoken request.
Well, the best was you had this combo, right? Because you had anonymous.
Yeah.
So then you had I'm concerned because I'm pretty sure my wife is having an affair. Anonymous, right? Yeah. So it's like we don't know who that was, but we're going to pray for that. Of course, everyone in the room knew who that was. But then you also had the person, like John Smith, and it's unspoken. So I need you to pray for that, but I can't say what it is. Yeah. But you just need to know to pray for me. But then you had anonymous unspoken. Which was I don't know who this is for
or what they need,
but I'm going to pray now.
But I do think that and that is something that you hear time and time again for people in our church is that we are a place where people can be real, and so let's not underestimate the impact of that for all of these people that are going to be walking through the door for the first time in these couple weeks, and how whether it's through the teaching, whether it's through what we do in arts, whether it's what we do through testimonies or whatever it could be, that authenticity could be a breath of fresh air or something that people have never encountered before.
Yeah. And in many ways they may not be ready for it.
Yeah.
But what we've seen time and time again is that authenticity comes through as something that, I may not be ready for this, but I'm willing to take a chance with this because it's the closest thing to connecting with what I'm going through right now.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's look at week 3, because week 3 takes a little bit of a turn as we're not so much concerned or focusing in on maybe the dilemmas of life or the challenges of life, but we're talking about how love can shape my purpose.
Yeah.
So what have we got here, and what are we looking at?
Well, I think trying to connect with that need that I think every human being has to. In some way be meaningful, in some way contribute something meaningful to the world to have some sense of significance in their life in what they're doing. And so, and how God's love can help shape that in us. So the famous, we have 2 scriptures that we're going to be looking at in this one. The famous love one is the chapter from 1 John where, John uses the word love probably 48
Almost
times in
much,
3,
yeah.
But where he says, "Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God." And it just continues to go on with that. But the heart of that passage really is about, because God loves us, we ought to love one another. And what we're really framing in this one is that God's love, the purpose that God's love has given us, that purpose is to love others. And if we live a life of love for others, we are going to live a meaningful life. We are going to live a purposeful life. We are going to live a significant life. And so we're going to get a picture of that from Jesus himself, looking at John 13, which is the passage that's about where Jesus washes the disciples' feet. And one of the things that I love about that passage is it says at the beginning of it, now Jesus demonstrated the full extent of his love. And so if you want to say what it looks like to like the fullest extent of what it looks like to love someone, and then he washes their feet. And so I think there's going to be a great kind of, hopefully, a vision, a picture we can give to people through this about how loving people, serving people will fill their life with a purpose and a passion and a sense of mission that, you know, maybe they've been scratching and clawing and trying to find in all kinds of different places, but it's love, God's love, that can help them find it.
Well, and I mean, let me ask you this too, because I don't know that I make the automatic connection to what Jesus did by washing their feet as being, how does knowing that that's what he did help me find my purpose?
Well, I feel like, you know, he washed feet, which actually, again, that was, you know, a symbolic act that fit in that culture. But what he says at the end of that passage, you know, so at the beginning, it starts by saying he showed them the full extent of his love. And then at the end he says, now that I have done this, you should go and do this for one another. And so in some senses, I feel like the question is, okay, what happened in between that, you know, that love and that commission to imitate him? It was this act of service. And so for each one of us to go, okay, what is the act of service that I have been created for, called to?
Right.
You know, what is the thing that I am to contribute to this world? And
so, and that's really then, that becomes the shift that says, you know, this is how love answers this question differently. Because whenever I think we tend to think, well, my purpose needs to be very connected to my talents, needs to be very connected to my thing that I can contribute to the world, or it's connected to what I have to offer. And sometimes that can get into selfish expressions of what we perceive to be purposeful activity, when maybe the key is to start by becoming a servant, to start, and that path will lead you to your purpose in life, or it's
to start from a place of, what does it look like for me to love people? You know, because God is love, and because he loved us, we should love others. And so, you know, I personally feel like if that's the guiding question of our life, like, how in this day and in this week and in this situation can I love people? I mean, the natural result of that is going to be purpose and meaning and significance.
Yeah.
Now, it may not be awards and accolades
right.
and prestige and power, but it is going to be meaning and significance.
How do you see the blessed practices playing out in this? I know that like from the long range view, you know, we might be sort of saving some of that for some other weeks. But I mean, do you see like an opportunity there to give a nod to this idea of discovering your mission or discovering your purpose through these practices?
Yeah, potentially. I hadn't really thought about it, but that could be a part when we get to brainstorm.
Because I think you know, again, it's giving people those practical steps. It's like, especially because the foot washing ceremony is symbolic for us. I mean, it was necessary then, symbolic for us. It was, you know, certainly symbolic then too. But in terms of like, okay, I'm gonna go get them. What do I do? You know, I think that it's another opportunity, perhaps, you know, to bring back those the way in which, you know, we think about it. And I mean, for somebody who did start coming on September 14th, should they decide to come back, it could be their first opportunity to hear something along those lines. All right, and I did love this. Did you write this? Jesus did not live a selfie life.
Oh,
was that yours? I love that. Jesus did not. I have an image of Jesus getting ready to wash the feet, and then so I don't want to jump to the brainstorming part.
That's pretty funny.
Too quickly, but that's what I saw.
Funny.
All right. Well, session 4 is something that if you've been around community for a while, you're familiar with the experience of what we do. It's Celebration Generosity. And Celebration Generosity is the opportunity. It's our first week of the fiscal year. So it's the first time that we have an opportunity to essentially receive an offering for this budget year. And we're going to celebrate that first weekend by giving it all away. We give it away to 4 teams, and if you've been around for a while, you know that the 4 teams are the Haiti team, the Philippines team, the New Thing team, and prior to this year, the Community 412 team. Now, the Community 412 team over the last couple of years has had local expressions at campuses, depending upon the campus and just sort of what was taking place in that community to be able to kind of restore that community. It was very much a piece there. But the Community 412 brand itself didn't necessarily travel, depending on the organization or the partnership. And so actually, even though Community 412 is a huge part and is the 4th team, we're actually going to look at renaming that team as being the kind of the Restore Community team. And kind of the idea that in your community you have an opportunity to restore a neighborhood. And so that 4th team will still need to be very specific about and make a compelling case for what that looks like. But just, for those of you, who have been with us and oh, well, that's Community 412. Well, in this case, I mean, depending on the location, it may very well be Community 412, but your location, it might be Friends of Swift or Gateway Learning or what have you. And so there's lots of ways in which we're going to try to craft that just a little bit differently. But before we get into that, or maybe it's too late because I got into that, but why don't you talk to us a little bit about the way in which Celebration Generosity ties into the Love Can series, because our title for this week is Love Can Change the World.
Yes, and so sticking with our theme of the most famous passages in the Bible about love, we decided this one we would go with the most famous verse in the Bible on love.
Wept. Oh, on love.
Second most famous verse. But we're using John 3:16, because when you think about that verse, it says, "For God so loved the world that he gave." And so, talking about how God's love can compel us to give sacrificially to change the world in the way that, God obviously gave of himself sacrificially, and it changed the world, that he's still in the business of doing that. His mission is still the same. It's just now he's handed the baton to us and asked us in a real way to carry that forward in sacrificing to change the world. So I think that sets us up well for the Celebration Generosity kind of vision and ask during this series, which we'll have to be building up to through all the other weeks of the series and highlighting. But I don't know, it just feels like that verse is a little bit of a no-brainer to go into this.
It's so great. And actually, just last week, I had an opportunity to meet with reps from all the 4 teams and just kind of cast a little bit of a vision of Love Can and talking about, for God so loved the world. And I think everybody was really energized by this notion of like kind of, in some ways, you're passionate about this particular area and to really feel that, what you're doing is something that is all-encompassing of this amazing verse that, like, so many of us, for many of us, it was our first encounter with what Jesus actually did, was by learning this verse and understanding the gravity of it and being able to celebrate it in a way this weekend by giving it all away is pretty cool. And the other thing I'd say, Tammy mentioned this, and I think, it is true that there will be momentum that we'll need to build in order to, create the right kind of marketing and publicity and awareness of Celebration Generosity. And I think it's actually, it's a great companion piece to the notion of, new attenders, people who are coming maybe because of our work that we've been doing to get people there for September 14th. I think anybody who, we all respond differently to challenges and to opportunities, and I think there's a handful of people who look at Celebration Generosity as really their starting point for generosity. And we know this from the data. We know that Celebration Generosity contains some of our most, our highest number of first-time givers show up through Celebration Generosity. So we know that it's something that inspires those who have yet to give to start. And so even more so for somebody who's brand new to be compelled and inspired that, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. Not only is this church being authentic about the fact that we've got real problems, but they're a church that's going to give all the money away to these, worthy causes. I can't imagine that a place like this exists. But that'll be, something we'll have to get in front of, something that we'll have to, make sure that we're intentional about. That's the story. Anything we're missing? Anything we should include that we haven't said already?
I don't think so. Just invite. Get people there. Yeah,
get those butts in the seats. All right. Well, thank you, Tammy, for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a pleasure. And this has been Tammy Melchien. I have been Eric Bramlett. And this has been the Big Idea Podcast. So long, everybody.